What does it mean to become a man? What does it take? How do you know when you've passed the test? How do you define what being a man is? Every one of us as men has grown up wrestling with these questions. Some of us have found the answers we were looking for through older men in our lives. A good father, a loving uncle, a coach or a teacher who took us under their wing at just the right time. But a lot of us, most of us really, have a complicated history with the idea of manhood. Maybe we didn't measure up in all the ways our fathers wanted us to. Maybe we didn't have a father at all. Maybe our interests and abilities didn't match what the culture told us we were supposed to be. In this video series, we asked 3 of our BraveHeart leaders to sit down together and share the story of their own personal journey to manhood. We want to help men see that every man's story is unique, and it matters, and that it belongs. And that no matter how messed up you think your story is, it can't stop you from becoming the man you're meant to be.
I think of my story in layers because it's really complicated, even for me. But there's a layer with my dad, there's a layer with my mom, and then there's kind of a redemptive layer about how God inserted Himself all along to rescue me, to show me a way out, to lead me to Himself, to have a moment like you're talking about, Rob, where I just go, "You're the one. You're the one that I want to follow. You're the man." So my dad was religious. He was a pastor and missionary. I grew up in a religious home, very strict home, and a small town in Texas. So actually a couple of small towns in Texas. So right from the get-go, we already had a family system that was set up around performance. So when you're in a small town and your dad is the pastor of one of the biggest churches in town, everybody knows your name. The principal knew me, all the teachers knew me before I ever got in their class. Same with my sister and my brother, although my brother was so much older. By the time I even got kind of aware of him, he was going off to college. So we learned early on to present like everything was okay. And we had to be good at it because we would get punished if we were not good at it. We were people watching us all the time. My sister got in trouble a few times, and I saw that happen because somebody saw her at the local Dairy Queen with a guy when she shouldn't be with a boy, and then got in trouble. So I learned early on, okay, you can't do anything it's all going to be reported back. So that's the context, I guess. And then in that space, my dad, I think of him as a really good man, but a really bad father. He just wasn't a good dad, but he wasn't a bad man. And I think there's a day in the future when I'm going to sit down and have a beer with him. He's already in heaven, so I'll have to wait till I get there, but we're going to have a beer, which we've never done before. But he wanted me, he was pretty addicted to his career as a pastor. Very addicted to that, very much. That was his whole world. And we were all sort of like chess pieces on his playing board. So we all had assigned roles. My mom, my sister and I all had assigned roles. And he had a kind of role description for me that I didn't fit. He wanted me to be a rough and tumble boy who liked to play sports, who was, a good old boy. I think if I'd been more like you, Chris, he would have really been excited to have me as a son, because I think he was looking for somebody more like you. But I was not that. I was an artistic, imaginative, empathetic, tender-hearted kind of young boy, and I knew what he wanted from me, and I did my best to try to perform it. But he found my insufficient, lacking. And I guess
how was that mantle placed upon you, Michael? Like, was there one like really like conversation that made that happen, or was it through just various moments?
It happened through various moments. I mean, like there's one example I remember. If you know of Southern Baptists, they had an organization called the RAs, the Royal Ambassadors. They were sort of like the Crusaders or the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I was young, I don't remember how young, but probably 7 or 8. I can't remember exactly. He signed, without talking to me about it, he signed me up for the basketball league. And put me on the team. And the whole reason was because I was the pastor's son and it was the RAs, I had to be on that team. I didn't know how to play basketball. I didn't know anything about the sport. I had never played the sport, and my father would not teach me the sport. Like even after he assigned me the job, he left me to my own devices. And so that's part of the way I learned of what I want doesn't matter, who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that you do what I'm telling you to do, because it serves kind of the story I've got going on about who I am in the community and that kind of stuff. So there were other examples like that happened over through the years where he didn't consult me about anything, didn't even warn me. I just signed me up for to mow lawns one summer, put my name in the paper advertising me. And I only found out about it when people started calling and asking me to mow their yards. So, things like that. So there was just in some ways the opposite of you and your dad, like no communication, nothing like that. But because and actually because I didn't fulfill those roles well, he didn't like the way I did it. I think he somehow decided that I wasn't worth his time. We've talked about it once I was an adult, we talked about it, but he didn't want to spend time with me. And I wasn't just imagining it, because we did talk about it later. He wouldn't hang out with me, never threw the ball with me, never taught me anything. Even when he did take me, like some of the other guys in town would go hunting and they'd bring their sons, he would bring me because that was what they would expect him to do. But even then he wouldn't, other men showed me how to do stuff, not my dad. So I always got the message that from my father about manhood, that whatever a man is, I'm not it. I'm not a man. I'll never be a man. I don't have what it takes. And I'm not even worth spending time with around it. And so I grew up in this sort of shell of, that's my big awful secret, is that I have the body of a boy, but I'm not really a boy. I have the body of a young man, but I'm not really a young man. I'm somehow defective. There's something deeply, deeply, deeply wrong with me. And so my whole upbringing became about learning how to keep that secret. That was the natural way for me to go, because we were already in a family that was keeping secrets, right, of how we present ourselves. So, I had buddies, I had friends growing up, but I was always outside the circle looking in, kind of like trying to figure out. I felt very much like an alien. Like every other young man got some kind of a handbook that told him how to be a young man, and I didn't have the handbook. And so I was watching them trying to mimic or emulate or act like, always from a place of, I certainly don't measure up. I don't have what it takes. I'm not whatever that is.
So the desire was there, but the know-how.
Yeah, wasn't there. Yeah. There were some.
It's an interesting thing that you're bringing up too, though, Mike, because it's like, I think a lot of times, like when it comes to raising boys into manhood, what happens when they don't share the same affinity as you? You know what I mean? Like, because the part I really relate to what you're saying is, like, I remember, I worked on little model cars or these little trains, which I mean, if people that know me now have known me for years are like, I can't see you doing that. And I'm like, yeah, I know that's because I don't do that. I only did that
right,
because that was the only way to be around my dad. My dad didn't take it. And my dad did not take interest in what I wanted to do. He didn't come to my things and show up in the world that I wanted. It's like I had to do the things that he wanted, or we weren't going to do anything. And I just remember, like, what happens when you don't have the same affinity? You know, it turns out I don't like those things. And so, and that's an interesting part is for men, and the challenge to men is like not pushing your affinities on, and then being there when to celebrate the affinities, you know,
not to live your
really
unfulfilled dreams through your son. I mean, what I say to
Right.
dads now is, you know, your son didn't choose to be your son, but you did choose to be a dad. And so it's your job to get out of your comfort zone and go be with your son and the thing he loves. The thing that my dad, when we talked later, by the time he died, we had a decent relationship. But when we talked in adulthood about all those times, he said he felt like he wasn't sure he could win or he could do it right. So he avoided it. So he didn't want to do things I wanted to do because he didn't want to look foolish. And that I was enraged by that, even as an adult, going, you didn't want to get foolish, and it scarred me. Like you need to go look foolish for your son. Like, do what you need to do for your son. So yeah, that never happened with my dad growing up. So on that layer, it was all pretense and me definitely being a poser, hiding very well. When I didn't think I could fake it, I would just stay away from things. Like I didn't play team sports. I worked really hard to stay out of locker rooms, because that entire dynamic of how guys are have such affinity with one another in a locker room, I had no clue how that worked. And so there were things like that where I just had to try to navigate it best I could. And then on top of that, the second layer is my mom. And I mentioned already that my dad was pretty addicted to his work. All of us had roles to play, and my mom is a tragic figure in a lot of ways, because she hated being a pastor's wife. She was in a small town where every word that she would say in confidence would be spread as gossip. So she could not share with she had no girlfriends. And my dad, because of his addiction, I guess, because of what he was spending his energy on, the church was like his wife, and my mom was like his mistress. So she hated the church because it took my dad away from her. And so here I was, this emotionally sensitive, empathetic kid who I didn't understand those dynamics, but I could see that my mother was very sad. I mean, there'd be day after day when my dad would walk out the door to go to the church, which was only like 3 blocks away. She'd close the door, wave goodbye, turn around and start crying. And I would be like, wow, Mom, what's wrong? And it's 4 or 5 years old and trying to, it's okay, Mommy, and that kind of stuff. But because of her brokenness, you mentioned, Rob, that your dad had an abusive past. My mother came out of an abusive past. Her family, there was a lot of physical and emotional and sexual abuse that happened in her family. We didn't know that. She never talked about it till very late in life. But she took advantage of me in those moments where I just wanted her to feel better, but I obviously didn't understand what was happening. My mom, as hard it is to believe this can happen, my mother sexually abused me when I was 5 years old for sure, like that most of that year, but probably before that. I have snippets of memories before that. And then kind of stopping around when I was 6 years old, through a series of great events that God orchestrated. But that, on top of everything that was already happening with my father, this was like an atomic bomb being dropped on me as a boy, on who I was, on my sexuality. Everything just got blown to smithereens. And I thought, not only am I not what my dad wants, I'm now proven how weak I am, because I've been dominated by a woman, which, and I understood even as a kid, that was not a good thing. And I was very screwed up from that point on about what relationships were and how they worked and how all this stuff worked, because my mom and dad didn't have a relationship that I was like, I want that. So by the time I got into puberty, and things started getting really weird, because I had these scars from my childhood that I had shut away, and now I was starting to come of age and was beginning to really notice girls and being attracted to them. But weird thing would happen. I would feel attracted to someone. I'd start whatever junior high flirting is, I would do that. But if the young lady turned her attention toward me in any positive way, I would suddenly be repulsed by her. And it would be this like Jekyll Hyde flip of the switch where I just couldn't tolerate being around her. And of course, now I know, looking back, that I was having a PTSD trigger reaction to my abuse, because any feminine affection coming my direction would trigger what had happened when I was a kid. But I didn't know that. And so I went through all of my years as a young man hiding an even deeper secret about how completely effed up I am, and how completely inadequate I was, and how I can't even like a girl, right? So on top of that, it gets worse, because on top of that, I started looking at my buddies, and I thankfully did have some really good friends who I started looking at them and how easily they had relationships with others, excuse me, and how they could pursue girls so almost effortlessly. And I know it wasn't, but from my point of view, it looked really effortless. And I started to envy them and go like, man, I wish I could be that guy. If I was that guy, I would be able to have a relationship with her. And then in the weirdness of puberty and sexual stuff, I started to fantasize myself as that guy having some kind of relationship with her, with whoever the girl was. And then that shifted to, man, if I could sexually dominate that guy, I would prove that I have, this is whatever that logic is, I would prove that I have the goods to actually be with her, because it'd be like, I don't know, I'd dominate him and he's sort of with her. So that works out. So I started having the worst possible, what I could imagine, the worst possible sin problem that you can have if you're going to a Southern Baptist church in the 1980s in Texas, is that I started struggling with same-sex attraction. I mean, I learned much later it was all to do with envy, but at the time it was just the worst horror that I could imagine. And so coming into manhood for me was like I dead on arrival. I didn't have the right, whatever it takes that my dad thought. I didn't have the right, whatever it takes that women need. And now I have on top of that this desire that I don't want, and this kind of weird temptation that is, on the one hand, like I wanted to indulge, and on another hand, I was repulsed by. So all of that kind of brought me into my year 18, 17, something like that. And I know, so I'll turn it around because it does have a good happy ending. The other layer of this is the redemptive story that's there. And when I was 5 years old, I had my first encounter with Jesus, and it's a great story of him just coming into my room at night after I'd gone to bed, and in such a way that I knew God had shown up, and he had a conversation with me about my life that night. And I'll tell you what he showed me, because it shaped the rest of my days. But he came to me, as like, he was looking at me and he said, your life right now is like a fan, or like like you have 1,000 different pathways you could walk. So he opened up his hands like this, and it was like a fan. And there were 1,000 different grooves that I could take. And it's like, you could take any number of steps, any number of directions you want to go. And if you choose to follow me, all of those disappear. And it's like he closed all the options. And he said, it leaves only one. You just have one path, but it will be the best path. And if you take it, I will cover you with my hand your entire life. And as a 5-year-old kid, first of all, I didn't have the mental acuity to understand something like that. But somehow in that moment, I did. I understood what he was asking me. And I started to cry, not because I was moved to joy or like, yay, God, but because I was pissed at him for putting me in this position at 5 years old. I was like, this is completely unfair of you to do this at this moment. But working through that, I was like, but I know it's the right decision. So I made a decision that night to actually, okay, I will do as you suggest, and I'll choose to follow you. That decision saved me when I got into puberty. It saved me when I got into college. It saved me ever since, because I had that decision stuck with me in a similar way to Chris. You talk about, we're Parkers and Parkers don't lie. I never deviated from it. So that saved me alone, because I know now that was a rescue operation, that God was coming in at a moment when I was being sexually abused and rescued me from it, gave me a way to get out of it, basically. And then there were key individuals. My fourth grade teacher, Jim McWilliams, for whatever reason, picked me and me and two other guys to take out and go fishing, to take out and go learn how to do stuff like that in East Texas, to spend with him, talk about girls with him, talk about porn with him. So he was a godsend to me, just to be able to have an adult male who saw me as a valuable human being. And then later, when I got to Austin, I guess about my year 15, moved to Austin, got thrown into this church where I met T-Mac, and T-Mac is one of the heroes of my life. Tommy McIntosh is his name. Everybody called him T-Mac. He was my youth pastor. He is a dwarf. He's something like 3'11". And you meet that guy, and within the 3 minutes, you never think about it again, that he's a dwarf, because he's such a big man inside. And he took me under his wing, and he was my first discipler. And I'm going to cry when I say this, but like, having him be my discipler was so redemptive, because if he could be a man, maybe I could be a man. Like, in my youthful way of looking at it, here was a guy who had a visible dysfunction physically, who had shown up as a man of God. And now maybe there'd be hope for somebody who was just shattered on the inside to get there.
And how kind of it was God to, I mean, if you want to look at it this way, but how kind of it was of him to set it up that way?
Yeah.
That it wasn't some just macho bodybuilder, backwoods country boy, whatever. Like, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And it is cool. Like, even to this day, I think he's nearing retirement, but he works in the Travis County jail with the most of the worst offenders. So he's a chaplain to the guys who are the murderers and the rapists and all that kind of stuff. And, any one of those guys could potentially like take advantage of him in a key moment. Nobody does, because he's, like I said, he's 10 feet tall when you actually meet him. And he was just a lifesaver for me, as someone who saw me. And then in the midst of that, there were these other guys who were part of my youth group, and they were a bunch of, in some ways, like a bunch of Chris Parkers, because they had dads who were healthy, and they weren't perfect, but they had good stories with their fathers. And they took me under their wing and accepted me into their group as one of them. And it took me like a year or two to believe that. But once I did, now of course, they've been my brothers all my life. And being with them was very redemptive for me too, in that process. And of course, it could go on. There's two other guys. There's Brad Bankhead in my college years, and then two counselors that I went to in adulthood. But I can just look back now and see this battle that's been going on over me about who I am as a man, who I am as a human, who I am as a son of God, and just the way that God allows other people to do bad things. He's not going to stop people from making bad choices that can really injure someone, but he has these redemptive, almost like special ops moves that he'll do at key moments. And because of that, and because at some point along there, I saw Jesus and said, you're the one, you're my dad, you're my brother, you're my teacher, that I was able to come out of it, recover a lot through the BraveHeart stuff that we do, but recover who I am, understand what the original story was meant to be, and that the deviation from that was due to other people's sin in my life, and my sin too, but like coming out of that back to the original design that God had planned for me. It helps me to do the work I do, really, because because I'm not the big macho guy who shows up who just like, I'm such a manly man and you should follow me. I do the work I do because I'm weak, because it was so hard for me to get here to do it. And if I can get here, anybody can get here, because I like my story is pretty much, it should have ended very differently, than it did. But I'm so thankful just for the gospel. The gospel actually works. And I really love that that it is that story of redemption.
Yeah. I'm going to make a theological statement, and I don't know if you guys will agree with me or not on this one, but I do believe for every man out there, I would say woman too, whether they have a relationship with God or, Rob, like you were saying, like, I just want to be an atheist. I really do believe that there is that moment in somebody's life, whether it's their darkest moment or the moment where they feel most vulnerable or the moment they feel most alone, where God really does show up as the perfect father. And, just as scripture says, he stands at the door and he's knocking.
Yeah.
And I just love how the same father knocked on the door for each of us in these moments, and he rescued us from ourselves. It wasn't even from our earthly fathers. It wasn't from our he rescued us from ourselves and the story we would maybe choose to write for our lives, and he invited us into his story.
Yeah.
And I just love that.
And thank God that he stayed in his, in the classic way that God does, one step ahead of the enemy. What I mean? Like,
exactly.
what the enemy intended for evil, God can still use for good. Because, Mike, the funny thing, I hear it in your story, and every time I hear it, I'm always blown away, because I can't but think, just how amazing the work you do now is for men. And as a man, I see you as such a great man that leads in such a profound way for men. And it's such an amazing story. And Jesus is just all over it, because, like, of course. And I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think, with the trust issues I have, coming out of my own journey in manhood, I love that, and easy for me to say, just file this under easy for me to say. I love that your journey is what it was, because I trust you as a man so much more as a result, if that makes any sense to you. So, and I mean, easy for me to say, I'm glad you went through all that shit.
Yeah.
But and even a little bit of playground talk, if you will, Mike, I was thinking about you today because, it's interesting how this aligns with your story, but, talking about not being able to get on the basketball court, didn't even know how to play basketball, like just not into all of that, wanted to be, I was invited to, I'm going to be hiking the tallest mountain in Colorado this summer.
Nice. Albert?
Called the Hope Climb.
Oh.
And it's for kids in India that are in just poverty, and helping them climb out of poverty. So it's raising awareness around that. But I had a couple guys in mind. I was like, I need to call and see if anybody else is interested in this. And your name came to mind. I was like, I bet Mike would hike that mountain with me.
Yeah. I would love to. That'd be awesome.
So, but you're a man.
Yeah. I know, it's so cool.
Rob, and again, Rob, you're a man, and I love it how just unique God makes all of us, and that we get to have these kinds of conversations with each other. It's so encouraging.
Yeah, it really is. It's so good. It's good to be in the company of men, to know that all of our stories are fine. It's the notion that what makes them good is the redemption of Christ, all in all of our cases. So thank you guys for taking the time.